Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another exciting episode of the People That Might Be Interesting podcast. We go out into the world, we find the people that you should know about, and we bring them back here. Why? Well, because they're interesting. This is a cool one tonight, and I don't want my intro to take too long. I've recorded it a couple of times now because I just keep yammering and yammering. I'm going to stop. So, follow us on Twitter at PTMBI Podcast. Also, check out our new website, ptmbi.net. Tonight's guest is Michael Rectenwald, and this is the first time I might have somebody that's a little controversial on. I'll let him tell his story, but he was an NYU professor that had a kerfuffle with the university and mostly the student body. He was a critic of the social justice movement, and he got moved along. And he talks a little bit about that. But the reason he got moved along was because he was unorthodox. He did not follow the orthodoxy of the university, and it turned on him. And here was a professor that was steeped in university ideology who started going a new way and was punished for it. And one thing we don't hear much about in America anymore, and I'll just opine for a second, we don't hear from the academy. Now, we see college professors on, the news or whatever, but they're spouting whatever the talking points of the day are. We don't really get to listen or hear big thinkers thinking big thoughts. Maybe a little bit on NPR, but not everybody gets to go on NPR, and NPR doesn't do as much of it as they used to. But there was a time when we did. There was a time when there was a show called The Phil Donahue Show back in the 70s and 80s. And on The Phil Donahue Show, famously, he had Milton Friedman, the economist, who was somebody he did not agree with. And they have a really interesting debate. 1981, Phil Donahue had a technology professor from the U of I named Don Bitzer, who brought in a PC, a personal computer. This is 1981. What the hell? You mean I'm going to have a computer in my house? And it's this big, ugly thing. But he fires it up, and there's a demo, and there's a long piece on it. And he really predicts the future that day. It was amazing. It's amazing to watch. I tweeted it. If you follow me on Twitter, you can find it. It's a great and long interview. Ayn Rand was sort of famously interviewed late in her life on a show called Day at Night, where she was only listed. Today she'd be listed. It'd say Ayn Rand on the chyron underneath her, and it'd say right-wing nut job and firebrand and dangerous person, divergent personality. But in this case, it just said writer and philosopher, because they were taking her seriously. And you, the viewer, the listener, got to decide if you liked her or didn't like her or thought she was a dangerous person or you loved her. Michael Rectenwald has a great perspective on the world, and he's got an interesting and thoughtful perspective on the world. He's a prolific writer, but he's a thinker, and he's a thinker of big thoughts. And I was very excited to get him on the show. I think you're going to like this interview. And you get to hear me stumble when it goes off in an entirely unanticipated direction. I was unprepared for where it goes, and you're going to get to hear that. But he's a really cool guy. I could interview him for days. I think he would be interesting for a very long-form interview. But I get an hour, and I hope you like it. And he's got another book coming out next year. Maybe I'll see if he'll come back and I get to take another crack at it. Anyway, here is Dr. Michael Rectenwald. All right, everybody. I'm super excited. Tonight we have with us Michael Rectenwald. Did I say that right?
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, it's Dr. Michael Rectenwald. And so I guess my first question out of the gate is, you're a scholar and kind of popularly known as a critic of the social justice movement. How would you summarize yourself to somebody that might be hearing about you for the first time?
Well, yeah, I'm a former NYU professor who was also a Marxist. So I was very steeped in the left and leftist ideas. Wrote a lot about from a Marxist perspective, but also did a lot of work in 19th century British science and culture. And, I came out against the social justice left in 2016 just as the election was happening between Hillary Clinton and and Donald Trump. And I started a Twitter account called the Anti-PC NYU Prof. And from there, I started tweeting against some of the excesses on campuses, especially NYU, but elsewhere as well. And within 2 days of an interview I did with the student newspaper, I was in which I came out as myself, by the way. I had been anonymous to this point, tweeting for about 6 weeks. But it caught on and started getting some attention. So I was asked to do an interview with the student newspaper there. And within 2 days of doing that interview, I found myself strong-armed into a leave of absence, condemned by a committee called the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group, effectively banished to my own personal gulag in the Russian department. And it just went on from there until I finally made a settlement with NYU. But long-term leftist, former leftist, turned libertarian.
All right. So just to start off with some background stuff, you did your undergrad at Pitt, your master's at Case, and your PhD at Carnegie Mellon. So the question is, do you just hate warm weather?
Well, no, because I've lived in San Francisco, although it's not really warm there all the time. I've lived in San Francisco. I've lived in D.C. I've lived all over the place, but I lived in London. But yeah, I guess I like the Northeast. And Pittsburgh's sometimes considered Midwest. Pittsburgh is, not Cleveland. It's pretty much totally Midwest, but Pittsburgh can be considered Northeast as well. So I kind of like the Northeast.
Okay. Is that where you grew up?
I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I'm back here, yes.
All right. As a Midwesterner, we consider Pittsburgh part of the Northeast. I'll just.
Oh, okay.
I'll go on the record for that.
Okay, I'll go with that then.
So you have a PhD in literary and cultural studies.
Right.
What is that?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, this is something that comes out of the auspices of English departments, and it's heavily steeped in what they call theory with a capital T, which really means critical theory or neo-Marxism and
So like postmodern studies. Okay.
Postmodern stuff, yeah. That's right. But I did my work, and I detail this in Springtime for Snowflakes, my first coming out book, if you will. I did my work in 19th century science and culture, so I wasn't really working in the postmodern vein for the most part, although I'm very steeped in it.
So what would a typical undergrad look like in because you were a professor of literary and cultural studies?
Yes.
So what would an undergrad look like? What is the undergrad, and what's their career path with that undergrad degree or graduate degree?
Well,
I'm good.
Wow, that's a great question. Well, they take, it's basically they're going to get a degree in English. They're going to read a lot of theory. They're not going to read that much literature anymore because a lot of it has been banned now, especially the great dead white male. So, they're going to come out of there radicalized and in debt and likely having a difficulty finding a job, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, that does seem to be the order of the day. So what's your favorite class to teach? When you sit down and look at the course schedule, which is the one you're like, yes, finally, I get it?
Yeah, okay. So, I taught a lot of academic writing courses, and I have a textbook in academic writing across the curriculum, but it's called Academic Writing, Real World Topics. But my favorite course would have been 19th century science and literature, or science and culture, which I got to teach here and there. And I would study, we would go into some of the great debates in 19th century science, like the vitalism and materialism debate, the geology debates, the catastrophism versus uniformitarianism debate in geology, and then, of course, the evolution debate. And we do that through both literature and scientific texts. And that's what I love to do.
So And I've also noticed that I was going through your CV, and you've written extensively on secularism.
Yeah, that's one of the things I happened upon in my dissertation work. I started looking into 19th century periodicals, and I came across a group of periodicals that was founded by a bunch of working class intellectuals. And they were free thinkers, they called themselves. Mostly atheists, but some of them weren't. And one of the free thinkers was named George Holyoake. And he actually invented this movement called secularism, and he was the inventor of the word secularism. It had never been used before. And I got very deep into secularism studies. Turns out it's become a major burgeoning field in the academy. So I happened upon that, and it connected with science because it was the precursor to scientific naturalism, the movement that was behind Charles Darwin's rise, and the origin of species and the entire evolutionary theory that finally won the day by the 1870s. So, I found this to be very fascinating. One of the things I liked about it was I was resuscitating the value of some of these people that were overlooked by other historians, working class intellectuals. And I was a working class kid myself. So I really wanted to see what, these working class people had managed to accomplish.
So
and
people's intellectuals, maybe?
What's that?
People's intellectuals, maybe, to use
they
the
were
Marxist term?
They were certainly autodidacts, self-taught intellectuals, yes. And they were writing for the working classes.
Well, just to jump into it a little bit, I think the popular culture kind of understands what atheism is. At one time, I think people agnosticism was in the popular vernacular. I'm not sure it is anymore, but at one time it was. What is secularism kind of compared to those two things?
Well, it closely resembles agnosticism. And in fact, I've argued, and it's been successfully argued in one of my essays, that secularism was actually a precursor of agnosticism. And agnosticism, of course, means I don't know. And then it puts that question of God or theism off the table and suggests that we go from there. We don't know. So secularism was a movement that was founded to put aside the question of whether God exists and so forth, whether there was an afterlife, and to focus on the matters of this world in terms of worldly improvement for the conditions of people on Earth. And mostly for the working class, but they managed to penetrate middle class circles, and it became quite a watchword in the early and mid 1850s.
So do you think you're writing on secularism? The more that the social justice movement took on the liturgical sort of bent of religion, do you think it's your training in secularism that caused the cognitive dissonance for you, or where did that come from?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. I saw the social justice movement becoming a religious fervor, and I saw them as usurping the secular foundations of the university system, and I saw that this religious ideology was taking over the university system, and it just put off alarms for me. And I saw them becoming more and more religious, not fact-based, but based on no evidence and belief only, and a bunch of rituals that they undertake and enforce. And I thought, wow, these people are fanatics. They're worse than any fundamentalists I've ever heard of. And so that's why I critiqued them. Really, I critiqued them from that secular standpoint from the beginning.
So, it seems like in some ways they're the new Knights Templar. They're out there to spread the... Sorry, go ahead.
I would say they're more akin to the 1980s religious fundamentalist religious right. They're as censorious. They're worse in terms of censorship, in terms of fanaticism, in terms of lack of tolerance for varying views, for the enforcement of their ideas, except they have way more power. They have power over almost every institution in the United States, including in corporate America. So it's become one of the most rapidly accelerated spreading fundamentalisms in our world.
Do you recall the first time you saw social justice in the classroom? The first time you went, that's distinct. That's something that's maybe a little different, maybe new, maybe not entirely new, but is there the first time you went, I see what that is?
Yeah, I would say some of the things that really set it off was the way they were, not so much the classroom, but the entire university structure in which now all the policies were starting to be dictated by it. And the campus was being run by it, so that you had to, for example, use pronouns if people wanted to use a pronoun that they made up for a made-up gender, for example. That you had to then use that pronoun in the classroom, or else you'd face sanctions. The way they were shutting down speakers who violated their creed, things like that. I just saw, oh my God, this is scary, And I've since come to see them as also akin to the Cultural Revolution in China from 1966 to 76, in which they routed out all the four old ideas, old customs, old beliefs, and old something else. Anyway, I just saw them as kind of red guards, and it quite alarmed me.
Now, was this about the same time that I remember Jerry Seinfeld, and this would have been about 2015. So when was your conversion? Because he came out and said, I won't play college campuses anymore.
Yeah.
Do you remember
right.
that?
Yes. It was 2016 when I saw social justice come out in full force in the fall of 2016, because they were now making trigger warnings a regular thing. Safe spaces were being, set up. Bias reporting hotlines were now the mechanism du jour for reporting on people that committed a bias infraction or a microaggression. And they, basically they were turning the campus into a Stasi state where everybody's, encouraged to basically report on people for their infractions, for their wrongthink. 2016 when it really, really came home to roost.
Well, it's funny, you just said microaggressions, and I hadn't heard that in a long time, and I kind of thought to myself, oh, how quaint. I remember back when we had microaggressions.
Yeah, we're well past that now, right?
Well, you wrote a book called The Google Archipelago.
Right.
Which is a takeoff of the Gulag Archipelago. And you spend a lot of time explaining early on, like the first chapter is, or at least the introduction, is explaining why you draw this parallel between the two. So it's really a thoughtful kind of view on how big data is a pervasive and often controlling and manipulative part of our lives.
Yes.
How would you describe the Googles and the Facebooks and the big datas of the world?
Well, I think I called them a Google Archipelago. Google stands as like an emblem for the whole big digital technology, internet technology, confabulation, if you will. And I saw them as kind of undertaking the same kind of digital erasure and deletion and gulagging of people that, the Soviet Union had undertaken with the Gulag system, only it wasn't corporal. It was digital, and they were deleting people. They were deeming people deviationists, if you will. That's what the Soviet Union used to talk about people that deviated from the party line. And so they're using the same sort of ideas. In fact, Facebook has some of the same terms that the Soviet Union used to talk about people that they deemed dangerous. They used the term dangerous persons, and this is exactly the same nomenclature that Facebook uses to talk about people that they deem ideologically dangerous. So I thought, wow, the more I went into it, the parallels were so much and so many that I just had to write a book.
Well, it's interesting because so I heard about the Google Archipelago, your book, in 2019, which was the year it was published. And
Right.
there's a podcast that I listen to called the No Agenda Show.
Okay.
And it's John Dvorak and Adam Curry. And I believe it was John Dvorak talked about your book and how
Wow.
everybody should read it. And so I went out and got it and I read it and I was like, well, this is great. This is exactly what I'm talking about. And then for some reason, about, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks ago, it occurred to me to pick it up again. And I did and read it again. And it was more true in 2020 than it was in 2019.
That's good. That's good. Because people told me, "Oh, come on, you're going a little too far here. Don't you think this is slightly exaggerated?" But I said, no, this is going to get worse. And sure enough, it did.
Well, and the interesting thing was, so I'm reading the book, and it got me because of the introduction. It goes into things like the panopticon, and it touches on some things that I learned about as an undergrad. And so I then start listening to the audiobook of the Gulag Archipelago, which is this incredibly, and you might disagree with me here, but it's this incredibly romantic vision of the Gulag system in the Soviet Union. And I don't mean romantic in like a sexy way, but it's this it's not an academic history. It's like an oral history, and it's full of emotion, and it wears its heart on its sleeve.
Yes.
And
that's the correct usage of the term romantic, by the way.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Some English teacher is saying, see, I did a good job.
Yeah.
And so it happened to be roughly the same day. And I want to read you a quote from Solzhenitsyn and then a quote from you, if you don't mind, and then maybe have a comment on that.
Yeah.
So the quote from the Gulag Archipelago is, Macbeth's self-justifications were feeble, and his conscience devoured him. Yes, even Iago was a little lamb, too. The imagination and spiritual strength of Shakespeare's evildoers stopped short at a dozen corpses. Because they had no ideology. Ideology is what gives evildoing its long-sought justification and gives the evildoer the necessary steadfastness and determination. That is what the social theory which helps make his acts seem good instead of bad in his own and others' eyes. That is how the agents of the Inquisition fortified their wills, by invoking Christianity. The conquerors of foreign lands, by extolling the grandeur of their motherland. The colonizers by civilization. The Nazis by race. And the Jacobins, early and late, by equality, brotherhood, and the happiness of future generations. Without evildoers, there would have been no archipelago.
Beautiful.
And that, I happened to listen to that in the car that day on the way to work. I was listening to it on Audible, which it's great if anybody's looking to do that. Boy, it's a great way to experience that book.
Sure.
And I heard that passage and I was like, wow, that's incredibly moving. I'm going to back up, and I backed up and listened to it again. Literally the same night I read in your book, as stated above, ideology is invisible to those under its sway, which allows it to operate unimpeded by reality. If the digitalistas were able to recognize their own perspective as ideological, they might thereby elude ideology from time to time. But since the targets of leftist authoritarianism in the Google Archipelago are the political enemies, the digitalistas are unconcerned, even overjoyed by such virtual disappearances. Thus, ideology operates on a feedback loop.
Yes.
How does ideology drive Google and Facebook and the people that are very built into our everyday life now?
Very much the same way that Solzhenitsyn describes. That is to say, they think they're doing good. In fact, Google's, one of its first motto was, don't be evil. So they thought and they still think they're doing the work of good. They're doing good work. They're being good progressives. They're routing out evil in the world, even as they commit it on their own part. This allows them to be the zealots that they are. They think that they're operating on a higher moral principle than other people. And so did the Soviets. They thought they were operating on a higher moral principle. And this is the irony of leftist and especially leftist authoritarianism, which, of course, is the main type of which is Marxism. So I think that Marxism has mutated into a new social justice wokeness and is still operating in that same vein.
So let me ask you this. One of the things that I really like to do with my guests is put them on the spot. So here, you're now committed. You have to answer this and be right.
Okay.
What does the future look like?
Well, right now, it looks like we're going to be subjected to a kind of equality for the masses and a kind of oligarchy on top. So it's kind of like what I call corporate socialism, in which there's, equality for everybody except for the oligarchs who are going to have complete power. And it looks like to me they're undertaking it right now, and that the election of Biden is part of this. It's part of a global attempt to reduce the population to a state, not of servitude, because some of them won't even be doing anything, but a kind of captive, rather constrained, utterly controlled, and obedient class, while the oligarchs control everything, including ideas, the flow of information, our movements, our ability to express ourselves, our self-determination, and so forth. So that's the grim future that I see, and the only way out of it is going to be not a revolution by any stretch, because revolution always ends in horror. It has to be a rebellion of individuals, not of groups, not a collective movement, but an individual-based defiance is really what it's going to require to avoid this future.
Something I tell my kids, and of course they don't listen because they're kids, and I didn't listen when I was a kid either, is when the service is free, you are the product.
Right.
And I am Facebook's product that they are selling to advertisers. But it seems like it's more than that at times. Do you think that's accurate, or you think I'm overselling that?
It's more than just that, because they're not just out to make money, and they're not just using you as a product. You're not just the product, you're the subject. And they're not just out to try to use your information for monetary gain. This is a project in which they're trying to utterly own you, but not just financially. They're trying to control you. They want to create a certain type of subject, a certain type of non-individualistic, collectivized mass that they can, basically hoard, corral, and control. So the oligarchy, they have plenty of wealth. Wealth is not really the ultimate object. The ultimate object is power and control. And so I agree that they're turning us into products. That's not a big deal, in my opinion, because we can only be a product in some sense. But they're trying to get every aspect of life under their control, including our expression, our self-determination, our wills, and so forth.
It seems as if intellectual rigor is not something that's particularly encouraged anymore.
Not at all. Intellectual rigor is passé in their view. I mean, this was one of the things that disappointed me so much about what was happening, and more than disappointed me, it disgusted me with what's happening in the university system, where basically they just want Paul parrots to repeat certain phrases and plug and play phraseology and certain ideological to take certain ideological positions and to ram that down the throats of students and each other. Intellectual rigor is really out of the question, because that could lead to questioning this ideological homogeneity that they're trying to establish.
And I'll be the first to say, as much as I encourage my kids to become, math and science literate and hopefully, exhibit some excellence in it, I really appreciate, me personally, having a liberal arts degree and having a lot of exposure to different things. And there are times it almost seems like that's discouraged now.
Well, it's very dangerous to do a liberal arts degree. And it's also dangerous just to do a STEM degree, because they're both easily manipulated now. If you do an arts degree, a liberal arts degree, you're subjected to this propaganda day in and day out in every class. If you do a STEM degree, you don't know anything about the arts and sciences. Not the arts and sciences, the liberal arts. And therefore, you have no means to resist the ideology that they're foisting on you. So we're losing the critical evaluative mechanisms and techniques and habits of mind that make questioning dominant ideology possible. And that's really what's going on.
What it reminds me of, if you don't mind, just a second here, it reminds me of, so I went to what's sometimes referred to as a corn college. And I was the first member of my family to get a college education. And my mom, whose father actually wanted her to drop out of high school because women didn't need to, once women learned how to read and do basic arithmetic, they didn't need any more education. So my mom basically had to move out to even finish high school. Then I was able to go to college, which is what she always wanted for me. And as I was transferring out of community college into a university, which I was absolutely terrified to do, I remember she came to me and tried to tell me, well, you're going to go to the university, and there are going to be people that try to convince you of things, and just think about it before you do. And it's this great kind of, wisdom, if you will, that is
great
what
advice.
It is. Great advice.
Great advice. Sage advice.
Sage advice. But I'm 20, maybe I'm 20 at this point, and I'm stupid. And so I'm like, all right, whatever, Mom, you didn't go to college. You don't know any of this stuff. Oh, God. And so I go to college, and I think it's my second semester. I take a history class, and it was an art history class, which I really enjoy art history. And it was on Renaissance art in England and Spain. And on the very first day of the class, the professor says to me, or says to the whole class, all right, this is what I'm teaching you, but my real goal is to convert you to Marxism. That's my real goal. And if you do that as a result of this class, I don't care if you learn anything, you will get an A.
Wow, there was an unusually straightforward, honest professor, because some of them try to do it surreptitiously. But that's exactly what's going on.
And it's funny because after having him being very open about it, I thought back to earlier professors who were trying to be secret about it. And of course, then I call my mom that night. And I'm like, I'm sorry, Mom, I was an idiot. You were right all along, which I had to do a few times in my life. So that's always fun.
Yeah, that's always a good moment, though. Those are good moments when you come to terms with wisdom that your elders hold, and that wisdom actually fortifies you against this nonsense. And, I came across moments like that myself. My father was a very working class, but he was an independent contractor, his own man. And, I would buy into certain things, and he had a practical wisdom, but it wasn't stupid. He was somewhat intellectual, but not, he wasn't, he was also an autodidact himself. He was self-taught. He couldn't finish college. He was a depression baby. So he would say the same things to me. You're buying a lot of garbage. And sometimes it was coming through the TV. We were watching TV, and he was saying, they're trying to push Marxism right there. And I'm like, yeah, now what's the matter with that? Well, he goes, look at the Soviet Union. I'm saying, what's the matter with that? Because I thought it was a greater society, actually. And so I bought into a lot of stuff as well. I mean, it sounds like you didn't, but I did.
So what was your turning point? You did, and then obviously you've had a conversion. What was your born again moment when you were struck with the power?
Well, it's funny you should use that term, because actually I had a Damascus moment, if you will.
Okay.
First of all, I noticed the totalitarianism of my peers and my colleagues. I don't even like to use those terms with reference to them. And I don't mean that to be snobby, but they're zealots. And I found out what kind of zealots they were, how totally intolerant and fanatical they were when they came at me for just making a few criticisms. They treated me like the devil. In fact, they called me Satan himself. They called me a Nazi. They called me all these names. And I had been a Marxist to this point. And so that meant nothing, because I violated the creed. And they came at me like a horde. And I saw the collectivism they were engaged in. And it just shocked me. I mean, I just was woken up, and I'm like, I want nothing more to do with the left. That was the first step. And then while I'm going through all this with the social justice warriors in my university, my youngest son, came down with stage 4 cancer, lymphoma. And I was devastated. And I looked to the sky. I was driving my car back from, it was on my birthday, as a matter of fact, when I found this out. It was my 58th birthday, and I'm driving back from New York to Pittsburgh. And I had found out my son had stage 4 cancer, so I was going back immediately to get back to Pittsburgh, where he lived. And I looked at the sky, and I just said, God, what are you trying to do to me? Are you trying to kill me? And he actually spoke to me. And I don't want to get all mystical or religious here, but it was a conversion moment. I was immediately changed in my worldview entirely. Basically, I had been a materialist all my life, and now I came to believe that there was something greater, and that because the answer I got from the heavens was that my son would be all right no matter what. And that to me spoke of another world, and that there's more than this. And that was a major awakening for me.
So that happened, your Damascus moment.
Yes.
And the next morning you had to open your eyes, and it's the next day. And you can either live as if the previous day didn't happen, or as if it did.
Yes.
What was that next morning when you opened your eyes?
I had faith. From that moment on, I had faith. And that everything that was happening to me, because this was a very stressful time. Not only my son's cancer, which was the tipping point of it, but all the abuse and the degradation that people were putting me through, the horrors that I was undergoing, it just fortified me against it all. And I realized that I had a higher purpose, and that all this was coming to a head for a good reason, and that I was actually given a mission. I have to be honest. I was given a mission to fight against this and to try to open people's eyes to what was going on. And it just gave me a resolve that it is, there's always moments of doubt. Everybody has them. And I often look back and go, oh, did I make a mistake? Should I have just gone along like everybody else and never said a word? I would still be, a full professor at NYU. But then the answer comes soon after. No, this was the mission that I've been given. And I have faith that it's going to work out, and it has worked out so far.
Wow. So just to clarify, was this a religious conversion? Are you a believer now, having written so many years of secularism? Is this?
Yes.
So you are now you're a Christian.
Yes.
Wow. I am wholly unqualified to ask questions about religious conversion. I'll say that up front.
That's all right. I don't mean to throw you for a loop here.
No, this is fantastic. This is the interview that I've always kind of wanted. This is where I'm really learning about somebody, because the whole idea, I mean, it's the name of the podcast, people that might be interesting. And
yeah,
the whole idea here is to get in.
I was a guy that had been really almost one of the foremost scholars of secularism in the world. And people took me, they took that for a belief in it and a commitment to nothing but, secular views and values and all that. And but even while I was doing that secularism work, I found that those people, like the guy that I really focused on, who were open to the possibility of theism and Christianity, those were the people I focused on. And so the gates were opening slowly all along, and I was having a commitment towards the possibility of this happening. And it wasn't, but then it did strike me all at once. But I had opened, the gates had opened somewhat and allowed me to see that, you don't have to be a firm, denier of the possibility of this. And then I became completely wide. The doors were blown off at that point later, especially, when I found out about my son's cancer, and stage 4 is a serious situation.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So is this, I grew up a Southern Baptist, so I'll use kind of the phrasing of this here. So is this your testimony that you give? Is this the story that you give when you're, in effect, preaching the word?
Yes, this, for those that'll listen, I don't always, I don't lead with this because it will turn away people that I'm trying to reach, and to reach in a way such that they'll see the errors of this horror, of this totalitarianism that's on the loose, but I don't want to make Christianity a precondition for that.
Sure.
So I don't always lead with that, because I rarely lead with it, as a matter of fact. I lead with the intellect and with also compassion and all, kind of wisdom, I think, and reasoning about this stuff. And then if those who are open to hearing more, I'll tell it. Yeah.
That's great. So thinking about the future, where we are now, thinking about the future, if you could go back in time and change something, there was that singular event that might make a difference today, even if it was just the event where somebody was kinder to somebody than maybe they would have ordinarily been. Is there some moment in history where you could go back and say, maybe that's where things changed?
Do you mean personally or in the culture?
Well, let's talk cultural first, but then we'll do that too.
Yeah, in the culture, I'm going to say that there seems to be a point at which dogmatism has gripped the culture at large. And I don't know why, and I mean this kind of new zealotry, this new social justice, woke ideological doctrine and dogma. I think it was, I can't put my finger on a single moment that it happened, but there was a turning point at some point, and there seems to have been no going back from it since this. And I don't know. I'm going to say probably when, and this is not really a political statement, but when Obama was elected, I think there was this idea that everything came down to sort of race and identity and all this, and that identity determined everything about people, their phenotypical identity, not their real individual identity. When we moved to a kind of collective idea about what people were, as opposed to regarding people as individuals, this was a real bad turn in our culture.
Now, for you personally, jumping back in time, that one moment where you could go, haha, if I had my DeLorean and at 88 miles an hour, I go back in time and I fix something, what would that moment be?
Wow, that's a tough one because that would mean I had to do everything differently from that point on.
I know.
I don't have regrets. I just don't have any regrets. I think everything unfolded the way it was supposed to. I was meant to learn about Marxism because then I could oppose it. I was meant to learn about materialists, secularism, because then I could oppose it. I was actually meant to learn all these things in order to be able to be intelligently an analyst and a speaker about them and a writer about them. So I don't think that there was anything that could have gone any other way.
Oh, that's great. All right.
Yeah.
So I struggled with this question. So I always have a list, and I usually go off of it, but I struggled with this one. Does wokeness have a kryptonite? Is there something that is just antithetical to wokeness that you can? It's either an argument or a method of thinking. Is there something that just stops it in its tracks?
Well, it's endemic to it. Its kryptonite is actually part of itself, and that is it's a self-destructive movement and ideology because it ends up destroying those who believe in it. It eats itself, if you will, because it turns on everybody, just like the Soviet Union socialist ideology turned even on the most ardent believers of it. Just like in the French Revolution, the Jacobins ended up killing themselves and each other, cutting off the heads of their most ardent believers and leaders like Robespierre and others. So it's endemic to the belief that it's a self-nullifying creed. No one can ever escape it. No one is good enough. No one is pure enough. And for that, and it has no compassion for those heretics, those infidels of its creed. Whereas Christianity has redemption, and that's the big difference. Whereas under wokeness, if you're white, you can't escape it. There's no redemption. That's an original sin you can't get out of. With Christianity, all you have to do is confess your beliefs and that you're failed and that you're a sinner, and therefore you can be saved. It has an opening for the believer. There's a way out of your predicament, and there's no way out of that predicament for them. And that's what it's endemic to the creed itself. It's a self-destructive belief system.
You know, I've got a kind of a philosophy, almost a work philosophy, that many problems are self-correcting if you give them time. Is wokeness a self-correcting problem? Just apply time and solution presents itself? Yes. I mean, it is, as long as the indoctrination is somehow abated, because I've said this before, leftists will they'll eat their own, but the problem is that it's not fast enough because they keep producing them at a rate that outstrips the destruction of others. So if we have some abatement in the propaganda and the ideological indoctrination, it will die out, absolutely. Because more and more people that are believers will become victim to it, and then they'll wake up. And that's what happened to me. I was traumatized by them. And their trauma is really the only way out. It's not going to be through intellectual conviction or argumentation that is going to convince these people. They have to be traumatized out of it. So what's next for you? What are you doing now, and what's coming? Well, I just finished this book, Thought Criminal, which is a novel. And, that was quite an undertaking. And it was, I wrote for 12, 15 hours a day for 7 days a week, 4 months straight. And so I'm in a little bit of a reprieve right now. I'm working on speaking and writing essays and things like that. But I'll have another big project coming up. Another book will come out. It'll be out by June. I haven't even thought of what it's about exactly. But it'll happen.
And I'll just continue on like this. This is the mission I'm given, and I don't know every twist and turn before it happens, but it's going to be fine. And I don't know. I don't know what it'll become in terms of worldly success. I do know that I'll be fine. I'll be kept alive. I have faith that I will be provided for, but I don't know exactly what the what the outcome will be, and that's just the way it is.
So, as I was Googling, because that's how you do now, and of course they know what I'm Googling, what is the Citizens for Legitimate Government?
Well, that was a group I founded in 2000, 2001, when I was a leftist activist, and I believed that the election of George W. Bush was illegitimate. I believed that it was stolen, that the election had been stolen from Al Gore. And I believed that there was all kind of malfeasance involved. I'm not sure about that now, but Citizens for Legitimate Government is still up and operating, and we've revived it in terms of its original mission because I think that something very wrong, and I would say this, I think no matter what side of the political spectrum I was on, something very wrong has taken place in this recent election. So we're looking at exposing what it is.
All right. So if our guests wanted to read more about you or read your works, where would they go? What would they look at?
Yeah, I've got it all focused in one place now, michaelrectenwald.com. That's RECTENWALD, michaelrectenwald, one word.com. All my books, all my essays, all my interviews. I even have merchandise surrounding my book, Thought Criminal. So
awesome.
Yeah, I consider myself an intellectual entrepreneur in the economic realm. I now live in the free market, and that's where I can be found. Well, michaelrectenwald.com.
Fantastic. Michael, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you agreeing to come on. What is a fledgling podcast? We're just kind of getting started here. And this was a great conversation. And I love your book, by the way. I will get Thought Criminal, but the Google Archipelago, I found it very moving. I really appreciate that.
Oh, thank you very much. And by the way, I don't discriminate against fledgling podcasts because everything starts somewhere. And the importance of something is not how many people, but what quality of podcast you're doing and what it means to just one person if it does. And that's what's important.
Well, I love hearing that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody.
Thank you for doing it.
This has been Michael Rectenwald. I'm TJ, and you can reach me at PTMBI podcast on Twitter, and shoot me an email, shoot me a link, retweet if you can, follow if you can. Check us out. I have a new website. It's www.ptmbi.net. It's the abbreviation for people that might be interesting.net. And check us out. Thank you.